Welcome everyone to the 12th meeting of the Public Petitions Committee in 2020. This meeting is being held virtually. The first item on our agenda today is the consideration of new petitions. The first new petition for consideration today is Petition 1793, Alleviation of Water Poverty, lodged by Gordon Walker. The petition is calling on the Scottish Government to remove water and sewerage charges from all households in Scotland on a low income or benefits. The written submission from the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform explains that water charges are linked to council tax banding, as that quote will frequently reflect ability to pay, and also allows reductions and exemptions to apply both to council tax and water charges. The SPICE briefing and the Cabinet Secretary report both highlight Scottish Government proposals to increase both the discount available and the number of households eligible when the new charging period begins next year. And I think this is an interesting petition. In my own view, very often there was a concern when people were told they didn't have to pay their council tax and still had a charge for water and sewerage, and I don't think people quite understood the connection between them. I don't know if anybody knows what COSLA's view is on this, but obviously the Cabinet Secretary has provided an interesting commentary on it. I wonder if I can call Maurice Corrie first.
Thank you, Convener, for that. Yes, I pick up on the points that you've just already raised, Convener, and I think we should be writing to COSLA to get their say on this, because obviously it's an anomaly, I think, in the system. And I know when I was a councillor that certainly for low-income families or people who were certainly unemployed were obviously given the 25% housing, 25% discount on the council tax. But I think we need to look at this in a bit more detail, and I would ask for COSLA to be brought in and ask for their opinions on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a good explanation in our papers about why the water charges are linked to the council tax. And as you said yourself, Scottish Government have consulted on changes for the new period starting next year, and they do plan to increase the discount available. I'm happy enough to involve COSLA just to see what their opinion is on it. So I would agree with that course of action. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with what's been said. It's disappointing that the petitioner hasn't come back with a further submission in response to the government's comments. But some of the decisions the government has made, it's not clear exactly what they have done, but except that they've done doing something. But I would like to see more information from COSLA. So I think that's the route to go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. David Torrance.
Happy to go with the committee's recommendations and write to COSLA to hear their views. Okay,
thank you very much for that. I think that my sense is that people think there's an issue here. I think Gail is right to say that the papers and the Cabinet Secretary's briefing does provide an explanation of the way in which they've progressed, and they have consulted on it. So there is a recognition of there's an issue here, but I wonder, does COSLA have the view, for example, that separating one off from the other creates problems in terms of collection? I know in the past some local authorities have objected to the fact that they've had to collect water charges from people when they went and collected council tax. So I think as a committee we are agreeing that we should recognise there's an issue here. But just for our own satisfaction, we'd be interested in the views of COSLA on whether what's proposed in the petition is credible or doable, or whether there are issues round about that. I wonder if any members disagree with that, and if so, can you indicate in the chat? No, I think we have got an agreement, therefore, that we write to COSLA in relation to that petition. If we can then move on to the next new petition for consideration today, which is Petition 1802, Improving Safety for Cyclists, lodged by Pat Johnson, calling the Scottish Government to establish a standard mandatory brightness and width of flood for bicycle lights, carry out a publicity campaign to encourage responsible cycling, and increase availability of training facilities. The Scottish Government advises that establishing a mandatory brightness for bicycle lights is a reserved matter to the UK Government. It also advises its commitment to improving the safety of vulnerable road users, including cyclists. Cyclists were identified in 2016 as a priority area in the mid-term review of Scotland's road safety framework to 2020. The Scottish Government does not think a campaign is required at this time, but does encourage and is increasing cycle training for adults and children to increase cycle standards and safety. My own view on this was this has become an increasingly important issue. I think people have been heartened by the number of people seeing out on cycling during lockdown. People have, it's clear that people have been taking the opportunity to perhaps test their own courage and go out and cycle. We're seeing certainly local authorities trying to make that easier for people. And so I do think it's really important. I'd be interested in the views of other members of the committee, whether they think enough has been done. The only thing I would say is I thought the numbers that are flagged up around training for young people around cycling or and so on felt a bit low. But on the other hand, there is clearly a recognition by the Scottish Government that this is something that they should be doing. And the question is whether, that they're flagging a direction of travel that we would be contented with. So can I call in Gail Ross?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy for this petition, having gone back in the saddle, if you like, this summer as well. I used to do a lot of cycling when I was younger. I absolutely agree with the petitioner's point on the lights issue, but unfortunately that's the one that's reserved to the UK Government. It does mention the dynamo lights and how, the very nature of them, they only work when the bike is moving, so there's an issue when cyclists are stopped at junctions. I would hope that would be something that the petitioner could take up with the UK Government, because I do think it is a really, really important issue. The Scottish Government have also said that they've invested over £1 million for bikeability in schools. Now, I'm assuming that this is the same as the old cycling proficiency, which is what I did many moons ago when I was in primary school. So I do think that, that's a really worthwhile investment. And, the younger that you teach people how to be careful on the road, the better. But as the petitioner has said, there are a lot of adults that are now getting back on bikes. It's not just children, and the education needs to happen across the board. I do think that there is investment in Cycling Scotland. There's also investment in Sustrans. And certainly in my area, there have been investment in more user-friendly kind of streetscapes and things, which is good to see. And I know that that's been happening in other towns and cities as well. I do have great sympathy with the petition, but I think the fact that the Scottish Government think that they are doing enough in terms of road safety, preferring to focus on drivers instead of cyclists, but there has been awareness-raising campaigns in the cycling community as well. I don't see that we can take this petition any further, unfortunately. I would like to see the issue of the brightness of the lights addressed, but unfortunately that's out with our capabilities. So with regret, I think that the only course of action here is to close this under 15.7 of standing orders. Thank you. Thank you.
Tom Mason.
Vina, I haven't got too much to add. I mean, the area where the Scottish government, well, Scotland generally can improve situations is actually enforce the bike regulations. There's a lot of bikes go around without the right reflectors on and are in bad state of general repair. So, I mean, if bikes do have the right reflectors on, particularly when in darker nights, even if they're stationary and the dynamos are not working, then at least the car headlights will indicate their presence. And being noticeable in the dark nights is very important with bicycles, and it is quite frightening for drivers if they come across bicycles not so lit, and very suddenly in the dusk particularly. We really need to keep the training programs going. The more people are trained, the more they understand what's involved and the interrelationship between pedestrians, but cyclists and cars, the better life will be for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I think Gail Ross summed up the position perfectly, and I'm quite happy to close it under Standing Rules 15.7. Thank you.
Okay. Maurice Corrie.
Following on what Mason was talking about there, is that there is still a lot of bikes out there without the proper legal illumination, either back or front. And the other one is we're seeing an increase in these little sports bikes that young people are riding, sometimes on the pavements, and they certainly don't have lights and things like that. So I would like to see the Scottish Government persuade the local authorities to make sure that those current legislation, that current legislation, is actually implemented and actioned upon. But I see that, and I agree with Gail and David, that really take this position if it isn't going to really achieve much other than the advice we're asking for the Scottish Government to put in to local authorities and implement these regulations. And therefore, as a reserve matter, I think we've no other way other than to close this.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think there is a sense that this is an important issue. But that in terms of the Public Petitions Committee, there's not really much that we can usefully add, apart from flagging up that we do think this is a concern. The petitioner may want to contact the local MP specifically around the issue of lights, but I do think that's a really important issue. The more general awareness raising, I think in closing the petition, perhaps we could write to the Scottish Government to say to them that we recognise there's a lot of positive work done around encouraging cycling, but there are consequences to that, and we would hope that they would flag up to them with issues that have been flagged up by the petition, but that we'd hope that they would keep a watching brief on the impact of the greater number of cyclists now than in the past, and look at ways in which they can provide information to people. And of course, from the petitioner's point of view, and if in a year's time they feel there's absolutely no progress being made or continue to be concerned, this is a petition that can be brought back to the Public Petitions Committee. So my sense is that we are agreeing to close the petition. We're recognising the importance of the issues that are there. We would encourage the petitioner perhaps to pursue the reserved matters with their MP, and that we would agree to write the Scottish Government, just flagging up the kind of key issues there that are, and to some extent, exacerbated or accelerated by lockdown around cyclist safety. Is that agreed? I don't see any disagreement, so we can move on then, and we would want to thank the petitioner obviously for raising this issue with the Public Petitions Committee, and emphasise again the right of the petitioner to bring a petition back in a year's time if they felt that was important. The next new petition for consideration today is Petition 1803, Right to Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, BDS, lodged by Dr Uric Skandrit on behalf of Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to support the right of public bodies and institutions in Scotland to debate, and where democratically supported, to endorse and implement boycott, divestment and sanctions against foreign countries and those who trade with them. The Scottish Government advises that it does not advocate a policy of boycott in Israel, believing engagement with the Israeli Government provides an opportunity. It does strongly discourage trade and investment from illegal settlements. It also advises it does not wish to mandate how Scottish public institutions, organisations or individuals approach this issue. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. I think on this one I'm interested in hearing the views of the committee. Tom Mason.
I haven't any strong views in this matter. I think in this case we could be supporting the government, the Scottish government's attitude to this, and let and encourage the UK government to develop its legislation on a UK-wide basis. So in this case, I think at this stage we should be closing it and not proceeding with any action.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I have some sympathy towards this petition, but seeing as the Scottish Government does not support it and does not wish to mandate any public institutions, I'd be happy to close it under 15.7.
Okay, thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Yeah, I think that I'm of the mind to close the petition under Rule Point 15.7 of Standing Orders, but certainly I think that I don't want to see the Scottish Government mandating organisations, institutions, how they source their material or services from a country, provided agree that the entity is legal, and obviously in that vein. So I think this is an issue that we should just close the petition.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Yes, I think that's correct. The Scottish Government have made very clear that they don't want to mandate how institutions approach the issue, and I think that in a democratic society that's entirely the right way to go. So I would also move to close. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's very strong view from the committee to close the petition. I think we were recognising that there are important issues here, and there's nothing here that is preventing the BDS campaign from pursuing and arguing for that approach by individual institutions. But the view is that it's not, or the Scottish Government's view is clearly that it's not their job to advocate for that campaign. And that basis, I think people are, recognising the issues, but believing that in terms of the Scottish Government, that we would agree to close the petition under Rule 15.7 on the basis that the Scottish Government does not wish to mandate how Scottish public institutions, organisations or individuals approach the issue, but encourages UK Government to develop legislation in a manner which restricts the scope of application and respects the autonomy of Scottish institutions to make decisions on this issue. Because that's the other side of the argument, which is, well, it's not to the Scottish Government to direct people. These institutions and organisations should be able to campaign in this way if they wish. But I think we're agreeing on that basis to close the petition as been outlined. I think there's agreement on that. Okay, in that case, if we can move on to the next new petition for consideration today, which is Petition 1807 on compensation for paying university students, lodged by Jordan Hunter. The petition is calling on the Scottish Government to make funding available for Scottish universities to compensate paying university students for lost class time and a lower quality of education as a result of staff strikes and the COVID-19 crisis. We have received a submission from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. The Scottish Government notes the sector has done a huge amount of work, both in terms of contributing to wider efforts around responding to the impact of the pandemic and in terms of providing advice to staff and students. It announced a £5 million digital inclusion support fund for further education, higher education and community education learners, amongst other support. The Scottish Government also advises universities are autonomous bodies with responsibility for managing their own affairs. And I wonder this time, can we hear first from David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. This petition opens up a whole can of worms because the universities are autonomous bodies and responsible for their own affairs. And the Scottish Government is not allowed to intervene in matters in these decisions. And as you've already mentioned, the Scottish Government's invested because of COVID into digital so we could get additional learning facilities. So I'm quite happy to close the petition under 15.7.
Okay, thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Convener, thank you. I think I don't really want to see this petition close at this stage. I think we still need a little bit more information and really ask the Minister for Further Education, Higher Education and Science to respond to the concerns raised in the petition's written submission. And I think that's important because I think there's one or two things there we need to just satisfy ourselves as a committee that this is being given due justice this petition. And in particular, in these very difficult times at the moment, we are in extremely unusual times. And I would be happier just to explore this with the Minister before I come to a decision to close the petition, if that is the way forward.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I'm a bit torn both ways on this one. I acknowledge what has been said in our papers and from the Scottish Government, and David Torrance in his opening remarks mentioned it as well. Universities are autonomous, but there are also other sectors that are autonomous, such as local authorities, that we did give extra funding to get through the COVID crisis. And we have put extra money into this for the Digital Inclusion Support Fund. I think that there's a difficulty with quantifying what compensation would look like, because these individual learners, they didn't stop learning altogether. And I think we need to acknowledge the amount of work that was put in by further and higher institutions and the lecturers and staff to get a lot of these courses online. So whilst it wasn't the usual face-to-face teaching that they would normally expect, there was still a level of teaching happening. I would tend to agree with Maurice Corey. I would quite like to hear from the Cabinet Secretary and get his response to the particular points that have been raised in the petition. And yeah, just to see if this has been raised with the Ombudsman by any other students as well. So I'm happy to keep it open on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
My mind, it's a bit too early to close this off. We've got a situation where we've had an interruption on last academic year, and we're just coming into a new academic year where students know what the situation is, but we don't know quite how an ongoing steady state is going to happen as we go forward. I think we should be collecting more information on this and make some decisions after we've established that and question various sources of information. So keeping it open and asking information from the Education Department, I think would be the right thing to do at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much for that. My own feeling is that it, as Gail has said, is really not sufficient for the Scottish Government to say these are autonomous bodies, because they have intervened not just in the public sector but in the private sector to support organisations that are living with the consequence of the virus and lockdown and so on. And while I do agree, I think it might be very difficult to establish what the compensation would be, and certainly in terms of strike action, there's an argument that, while you might lose particular days, that the people will catch up later. But I do think there's an issue here around the consequences of COVID. A lot of people had, invested a lot of money. I'm thinking of people I know did masters. The masters were stopped halfway through. There's a question about whether that they then got the opportunity to do as much as they might have done if the course had been able to run to its conclusion. So my sense, although I think, and I'll bring David back in if he objects to this, but I think the general view in the committee is that we would want to explore this a little further, to write to the Ombudsman to ask, have they had complaints? Is this something they would look at? But also to contact the Minister for Further Education, Higher Education and Science to respond to the concerns raised in the petitioner's written submissions, which are issues that have not particularly been addressed. I wonder if people agree with that course of action. I'm not seeing disagreement. I think David is accepting that, yes. Okay, in that case, we're agreeing to take the action as I've outlined there. The next new petition for consideration today is Petition 1808 on remuneration of vital public service employees, lodged by Gerald Seenan. The petition calls on the Scottish Government substantially to increase the remuneration of vital public service employees, especially NHS and community care staff. The Scottish Government advises doctors and dentists in Scotland have received a 2.8% uplift, and that Agenda for Change staff in both England and Scotland are subject to separate 3-year pay deals, which were agreed in 2018. Pay for staff members in Scotland has increased by 9%, and staff not yet at the top of their band will have seen their pay increase by, in some cases, 27%. And I wonder if members have comments or suggestions for action. And can I start with Maurice Corrie?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm minded that the committee writes to the Scottish Government to ask what discussions have taken place in relation to the remuneration of community care staff, as I think we've seen some incredibly incredible acts of professionalism over the last period and the COVID pandemic, and also address it in both the public and private care roles and relate to what has happened. So I think it's something, and it's actually brought out this whole situation as much, some glaring gaps in this whole situation of remuneration. And I'd also be keen to write to the bodies that represent employees, such as the STUC and Unison, for example, and to seek their views, and any other organisation that might be involved in representing employees in relation to that. And indeed employers, if that is deemed appropriate. So I would be keen to continue this petition and write in the form that I have suggested.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. The wages of a job should reflect the value that we place as a society on that profession, and I tend to think that up until the pandemic, there were care and medical staff that possibly did feel undervalued, and this has really brought it into sharp focus that, you know, it's not your big hedge fund managers and your money people in big cities that are keeping the economy going. It's actually the people on the front line, and I don't think anything that we could ever say can thank them enough for what they've done and what they continue to do. I would agree with Maurice Corrie. I think we need to write to Scottish Government to see what discussions are taking place in relation to pay deals, and also include Unison and the STUC. I would also be interested to find out from the Scottish Government about the scope of the upcoming care review and whether that is just for residents and how we look after our elderly, or if indeed staff and other people that are involved in the care of our elderly are going to be included in that review, because I think for it to have any teeth at all, we need to be looking at it as a full package. So I'd be interested to see if care staff's wages and responsibilities and terms and conditions are going to be included in that review. So it's just an extra paragraph in a letter to the Scottish Government about the whole wages and remuneration issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. I agree with what Gail has just said. The various professions over this pandemic have performed exceptionally well, and we will never be able to really thank them enough. I think we as a society are obliged to look at the whole area of care and health to make sure we get the answer to various problems. And the new Care Commission might provide some answers. I think we've got an ongoing situation, and I think it'll be some time, possibly years, before we really come to the right conclusions. But by collecting information and identify where we're at and to establish some baselines, I think will be a good start. So asking the questions, I think, is the right thing to do at the moment. Keeping it open.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to call David Torrance, and then I'll call Maurice Corrie back in.
Thank you, Convener. I think writing to the Scottish Government and the relevant stakeholders is appropriate at this time to get information back, and I have nothing further to add. I agree with all committee members, and thank you.
Okay. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. I thought it was an extremely interesting point that Gail Ross raised just now about the ongoing care review. And I think that should be something put across strongly to the Scottish Government in relation to including staff in the review, if it is not already done so, and not just a paragraph, I may say. I think this is very important. So I would say we could convey that across if that would be the wish of the committee. I certainly would very much support Gail's points.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's general agreement that this is a big issue. I think the world turned on its head, did it not? The people who were most important theoretically turned out they were at the mercy of those who cared for people and cleaned for people, and are very often the poorest paid in the least secure work. And I'm thinking particularly around cleaning staff and so on, both in the public and private sector, absolutely fundamental to looking after people, and were putting themselves at risk. And I know that, from direct experience, there are people who work in the care sector who don't get paid an extra coin whether they work on high days or holidays. So they're actually, whatever day they work, get paid the same money, and are doing fundamentally important jobs without an awful lot of protection. So I agree very strongly with Gail's point about asking, to what extent the care review is going to take account of that. And I think we would flag that up too. I think in writing to key stakeholders, we should recognise that there are other unions that organise within the sector. I know, for example, the GMB certainly organises amongst care workers, so that might be another group. But I think we can agree to allow the clerks to look at who the key people might be, and indeed, in writing to the STUC, we may ask them to, consult with groups and organisations they're in contact with to respond on the issues that we've highlighted. But I think there is an agreement here that this is an important issue, and we want to pursue it in the way that's been outlined by writing to the Scottish Government and writing to key stakeholders. And if that's agreed, we can move on now to the final new petition for consideration today, which is petition 1809 on Reinstate Continuing Professional Development Allowance for General Dental Practitioners, lodged by Jordan Hunter. The petition is calling on the Scottish Government to reverse the withdrawal of NHS General Dental Practitioners Continuing Professional Development Allowance. The Scottish Government has confirmed that following discussions with the representatives of the dental profession, the British Dental Association, about the continuation of the Continuing Professional Development Allowance, it has agreed not to proceed with the withdrawals. So it looks as if, without even doing anything, we've got a result because the Scottish Government has already agreed to withdraw that option. But I'll just go through so that members have an opportunity if they want to say something on the petition. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. No, I just want to thank the petitioner. We have a result here, and I think it's the correct result. So the actions have been agreed, and we need to close the petition. Thank you.
Tom Mason?
Thank you, Convener. We have a process, and it seems to have worked.
Thank you. Short and sweet. David Torrance?
Happy to close the petition, Convener.
Okay, and Maurice Corey?
Yeah, I'm very glad to see this. The petition's worked, and I support closing petition as we've achieved our result.
Okay, it's nothing like taking credit for something without actually ever having to do anything. Heaven forbid that we politicians would do that, but there is a recognition, I think, that the Scottish Government has responded to concerns around this, which are reflected in the petition, and that what the petitioner sought has been achieved. So I think we're agreeing to close the petition on that basis, and Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, and that in doing so we'd want to thank the petitioner for the engagement with the Public Petitions Committee, and welcome the work that they did to bring this petition before us. And with that, that's us concluded our consideration of new petitions. Can I suggest that we suspend till 10:10, and then we'll resume to deal with continuing petitions. So we'll resume at 10:10. Thank you. I can reconvene this meeting and continue with the consideration of continued petitions. The first continued petition for consideration today is Petition 1545 on residential care provision for the severely learning disabled, lodged by Anne Maxwell on behalf of the Muir Maxwell Trust. The petition is calling on the Scottish Government to recognise residential care as a way severely learning disabled children, young people and adults can lead happy and fulfilled lives, provide the resources to local authorities to establish residential care options for families in Scotland. Since our last consideration, we've received submissions from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport and the Petitioner. These are summarised in the clerk's note. The Scottish Government advises it is working with Epilepsy Scotland and learning disability nurses to determine what further work can be undertaken to understand the national picture on epilepsy and learning disabilities. They will work together to try to identify the number of people with learning disabilities who also have epilepsy. I was very struck by the scale of the frustration expressed by the petitioner and was very concerned by that, the sense that there is a simple mismatch between what the petitioner is asking for and what the Scottish Government is wanting to do. I don't think this is about numbers in reality, although not knowing the numbers doesn't help. I think it's about not understanding the Scottish Government really not engaging with the argument of whether there should be this kind of resource and provision in Scotland for people with severe learning disabilities. And I would want to continue the petition further, but be interested in the views of the committee. And can I call Tom Mason?
Thank you, Convener. I agree with what you say. I mean, this seems to have been going on for a very long time. And I'm not sure, I mean, since 2014, I guess. And it seems to be little or no progress. Certainly closing at this stage will allow the government off the hook. I think we need to keep the pressure on, make sure the government does talk effectively with the petitioners and reaches some agreed conclusion, and then report back to us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I know the Scottish Government's been doing some work in this area, but I wouldn't be happy to close this petition. I think there's still a long way to go. And Convener, I'm just wondering if we could get the Cabinet Secretary in front of us to give us evidence so we can ask questions. If that would be okay with the committee members. Thank you.
Okay, Maurice Corrie.
With my colleagues' comments so far, and I endorse very much David Torrance's point about bringing the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport in front of us to further question her on these matters. So I would want to keep the petition open. I think it's an extremely important subject, and certainly I'm well aware of the issues in certainly West Scotland, or my region, and no doubt I can't believe it isn't similar in other areas too. So please keep this open, and we'll call the Cabinet Secretary before us. Thank you.
Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I was really sorry to read that the petitioner feels that this hasn't been addressed, and I tend to agree. I think that we shouldn't be concentrating on numbers, we should be concentrating on need. I think that there's a bit of a, certainly in my area, there's a bit of a misunderstanding about who it is that's responsible for this sort of residential care. Is it NHS, is it local authority, you know, does it revert back to Scottish Government? So I think there are a lot of questions that we need to ask. I agree that this petition is nowhere near closed yet, and I would be happy to get either the Cabinet Secretary or a representative in to ask these questions and to try and make some headway with us. So yeah, I'm happy with that suggestion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Gail. I think we should recall that the Cabinet Secretary was in front of us in January 2019 on this petition, and did make commitments. I think understood that it wasn't really sufficient to say, well, we don't really know the numbers. I wonder, you know, so that maybe, I think the committee does want the Cabinet Secretary to come in front of us, but I think we would perhaps, you know, flag up what these concerns were in correspondence, because it does seemed to me that there may be an argument that where policy is to support folk at home if they can, we're ending up in a position because perhaps of local authorities or whomsoever not having enough money, that they're then actively deciding not to have this other provision, and with the consequence for families as described by the petitioner. So it'd be interesting perhaps the petitioner to come back and inform us a bit more again, although it's been very informative. Are these fundamental questions, and whether the Cabinet Secretary is then able to respond to that. So I think we would want the clerks to flagging up to the Cabinet Secretary what these issues are, and where it's reasonable and possible within our own schedule a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary on these questions, but to highlight to her and her advisers that there is a kind of a missing the point here conversation about really missing the fundamental argument that this provision is needed, and it ought not simply not to be there because for a want of resources by those that are making the decisions. My sense is that the committee would be agreed in that approach. If anybody disagrees, they can indicate. No, in that case, can we move on to the next continued petition for consideration today, which is petition 1712 on soul and conscience letters by Laura Hunter. Petition is calling for the Scottish Government to review the use of soul and conscience letters in criminal proceedings and to produce guidance for the courts and GP practices on the use of these letters, including alternatives to court appearances if an accused person is deemed unfit to attend in person. Since our last consideration, we've received a submission from the Scottish Government, which is summarised in the clerk's note. The committee had asked the Scottish Government whether it has any plans to update guidance on the use of soul and conscience letters for the medical profession. The Scottish Government responded that they are unaware of any current abuse of the process, which is what the BMAS and the Law Society of Scotland also told the committee in previous written submissions. The Scottish Government also advises that the guidance does not come under the responsibility of the Scottish Government, and so any suggestion that the guidance could usefully be updated should be directed to the relevant medical professional bodies, such as the General Medical Council. I'll be interested in the views of the committee whether they think we can usefully do any more, but it did strike me at a basic level that it's a matter of the way in which the justice system operates. It is a matter of the Scottish Government that there is not a process by which people who should be coming from the courts are finding a loophole to avoid appearance, and that might be not what's happening, but that's clearly the concern that's been flagged up by the petitioner. I wonder if I can call David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. The British Medical Association Scotland and the Scottish Government have indicated there is no concerns in this area, but I would actually like to keep the petition open and write to the General Medical Council to seek their views and the views of the British Medical Association Scotland and their response. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie?
Yes, I'm of the similar opinion to David Torrance, and I would like to continue the action he suggested as well and keep this petition open.
Thank you. Gail Ross?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, the British Medical Association Scotland has said that there could be better information made available. So I think that given that the guidance is down to the General Medical Council, I think it would be good to seek the views. Whether we close the petition with a condition that we write to the General Medical Council, because I don't see that there's any course of action that we can take after that. Whether they get the reply, if they're going to update the guidance, they're going to update it. If they're not, there's very little that we can do. Or whether we leave it open to see what their response is going to be. I'm minded to close the petition with the proviso that we write to the General Medical Council, because I don't see that there's anything that we can usefully do with the reply that they give us. Thank you.
Tom Mason?
I think we should keep it open because there may be something comes up that we're not sure of at this moment. So we might close it prematurely, but certainly keeping it open and writing for more information on this, I think is the right thing to do.
Okay, I think that I understand the point that Gail is making, but in fact, I think if we close the petition, we can't then receive the correspondence or do anything with it. So I think my sense is from the committee more generally, while we think there's probably limited role for the Public Petitions Committee any longer in this, we would want to check with the General Medical Council whether this is something that they're aware of, that they're flagging up to their members, that there could be a misuse of this process. But I think we are also recognising that this is something that has been highlighted, and there will be a limit to the engagement of the Public Petitions Committee further. So I think, would the committee agree that we do write to the General Medical Council, seek its views on the British Medical Association Scotland's response, and then we can deal with it thereafter? Is that agreed? Okay, in that case we've got an agreement on that. If we can now move on to the next petition for consideration today, which is Petition 1722 on parking charges at Island Lifeline ferry ports by Dr Shona Ruman on behalf of Iona and Mull community councils and others. The petition is calling the Scottish Government to island-proof transport infrastructure to ensure that public bodies do not charge for parking in car parks at island ferry ports, which are essential lifeline services, and any proposed island parking charges are subject to rigorous impact assessment. Since our last consideration, we have received submissions from the Scottish Government and the petitioner, which are summarised in the Clerk's note. Michael Russell MSP has also contacted the Clerks to state his strong support for the petition, stating that, quote, lifeline ferry ports are just that, and barriers to local people being able to use the lifeline should not be permitted. The principle needs to be established, and then the detailed discussion can take place about particular locations where there are barriers still in place. Scottish Government Correspondence of 2nd and 9th March 2020 responds to the committee on an update on progress and commencement of island community impact assessments and the specific issue of funding, which is a particular challenge for island communities. The reply states that the intention is to implement measures, quote, as early in 2020 as possible, and in the interim period, quote, the Scottish Government should be operating in the spirit of the Act and taking island issues into account when developing or reviewing policies, strategies or services. And, quote, the islands team is assisting the Scottish Government colleagues with advice on whether to carry out an ICIE. On the funding issue, the Scottish Government has said that it is the responsibility of individual local authorities to manage their own budgets, but also recognise the financial pressures on local authorities, saying that local authorities receiving funding support for internal ferry services through the annual GAE calculation and additional funding. We've received a late submission from the petitioners, which has been sent to us separately. The submission highlights that the options for action as set out in the paper does not include the option to support the substance of the petition. My own feeling on this is that the whole thing about the Islands Act was that it was to understand the impact on islands of policy, both at local authority and government level, to understand the particular issues that islands face. I feel very strongly that if you've got a lifeline service, you ought not to be charging for people to park there. It's quite different from people parking at a shopping mall or whatever. And I'm great sympathy for the petitioners in this regard. But my question to the Scottish Government is, if this was a fundamental issue of the Islands Act to island-proof policy, then why is there been a delay? I mean, I recognise the challenges to the government this time, but I would have thought that that would be a priority. And I wonder if I can call members. Maurice Corrie first.
Convener, I think, as I say, I know a reasonable amount about this, having been a councillor before in Argyll Butte Council. But I think one thing's happened is obviously this has got caught up in the COVID pandemic, because I know that certain things are going to hopefully be resolved by March this year. It obviously hasn't happened, and I'm obviously concerned, having read the late submission by the petitioner again last night, of the issues in that. But I do think that we should keep this petition open. I think we need to keep a close eye on it, because it is part of a bigger picture, and you quite rightly say, Convener, about the implementation of the ICIA and also the reviews that's being carried out by the Scottish Government's committee on this, and also the impact assessment. Now, when we can park our cars free at railway stations on the mainland, there is no reason why they can't park their vehicles at, for example, at on Mull or Iona or any other islands as part of the same process. So they should not be denied the opportunity to do that. So I would commend that we keep this petition open and keep the pressure on the Scottish Government and the Islands Council Association to see where we go with the Island Communities Impact Assessment. And obviously we've learnt lots of lessons within the current pandemic. So I move that we keep this open.
Okay. Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I absolutely agree. There's definitely something here that's not being addressed, and I don't find the argument that because the impact assessments are not actually on statute yet, that they shouldn't be being adhered to and being done. Because certainly my time as a councillor, and I believe I said this before when the petition first came to us, you get papers put to you as an elected member and you have financial impact assessments, equalities impact assessments, and some you have environmental impact assessments. Councils knew that island impact assessments were coming down the line, so this should absolutely have been done. I do believe that the crux of the matter here is lifeline service. I think that, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it now, when Highlands and Islands Airports introduced parking charges on the islands, you know, it was vigorously opposed by their MSPs and nothing could have been done about it, which I think is an absolute disgrace. I think we're going the same way with ferry charges, and we need to do everything we can to stop this happening. So I absolutely agree this petition should be kept open, and we should be pushing to find out when the impact assessments are actually going to come into force. And I really do think that, I mean, I was on the committee that put the Islands Act through, the Islands Bill at the time, and this was exactly the sort of thing that it was put through to try and prevent. So I think for the Scottish Government to say that it's up to individual local authorities, there certainly is a way that the Scottish Government, I'm absolutely certain, can step in and make sure that these lifeline services are exactly that. And for Michael Russell as well to support this puts a lot of weight behind it too. So definitely keep it open and agree with the course of action that we need to push this more with the Scottish Government.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. I haven't much anything more to add. I just agree with what's been said so far. So keep it open and make sure that people perform what they said, what they should do.
Okay, thank you. David Torrance.
Convener, I'm happy to agree with the committee's recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, I wonder if the committee would agree then that we should perhaps be looking to get the Minister for Energy Connectivity in the Islands in to talk about this question, because it's one thing, as Gail has said, the committee took a really serious role in scrutinising and work its way through the legislation. To me, the fundamental point of the legislation was exactly that, and yet that's the bit that's not been action thus far. Would members agree that we could maybe explore through the clerks the possibility of the Minister coming before the committee, and that would also afford the opportunity for the petitions to flag up issues that they would see as being usefully directed towards the Minister? Is that agreed? I think we have agreement on that. I think we are recognising there's a fundamental issue here, which goes beyond the individual circumstances of what Glen Butte Council did to the working of the Islands Act and ensuring that, you know, in an island community, the ferry is absolutely fundamental, and there shouldn't be barriers put in place to its use, and therefore we'll be agreeing to pursue it in that way. If we can now move on to the next continued petition, which is Petition 1723, Essential Tremor Treatment in Scotland, lodged by Mary Ramsey. And I should indicate that Rhoda Grant MSP is expected to attend for this petition. The petition is calling on the Scottish Government to raise awareness of essential tremor and to support the introduction and use of a focus ultrasound scanner for treating people in Scotland who have this condition. Since our last consideration, we have received submissions from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. We've also received a late submission from James Bland of Insight Tech, which was sent to us separately. The Scottish Government submission advises it is unable to indicate a timetable for the possible establishment of a focus ultrasound scanner as a routine service at this time. as they will still await further research and evidence into his effectiveness. And I wonder if it would be useful to us as a committee to ask Rhoda Grant to welcome her to the Public Petitions Committee today. And she's a friend of the committee and has been here in the past, but this is the first time she's been here virtually. So welcome, and perhaps you might want to just raise your issues that you'd want the committee to hear before we consider how we might respond to this petition at this stage. Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for allowing me to come and speak to this petition again on behalf of Mary Ramsey, all know, and also representing the other people behind her petition, because there's a lot of people who support this petition. And there's a sense of frustration that magnetic resonance guided focused ultrasound technology, and I'm not going to say that again, is not available in Scotland, but it is in England and in other places throughout the world. Add to this the fundraising campaign to make the equipment available to the whole of Scotland, and you can see why the campaigners with essential tremor and their families are anxious that the committee and the Scottish Government really recognise the benefits of the therapy, but also that it can save a huge amount of money to the NHS. The committee meeting in January reported that the National Services Committee would welcome a reapplication with new evidence, and inside text submission to the committee that the convener just mentioned. The supporting documents provide that evidence. And that evidence was given to NHS England when they reviewed the clinical commissioning policy for England. And they now propose to treat 150 people with essential tremor a year, people that aren't suitable for deep brain stimulation, which is what Mary Ramsey herself had. Deep brain stimulation is already commissioned in Scotland for essential tremor. NHS England's clinical commissioning policy says that there's good evidence that the focused ultrasound technology is effective. And certainly no less safe than deep brain stimulation. And it costs just under £12,990 a patient, and that's about half the cost of deep brain stimulation. So there's a big saving to be made as well. The Scottish Government's aware that the clinicians are currently looking at purchasing the equipment, and there are discussions ongoing with Scottish National Services Division about the development of the service, which I think would be really great to have in Scotland, because patients here could receive state-of-the-art, minimally invasive neurosurgery for one of the commonest causes of essential tremor. And not only that, but it could also make Scotland a world leader in this field. Campaigners have asked me to ask the committee, they would really want the opportunity to show the committee members a short video of a patient's experience when undergoing the treatment. And Professor Nandy, who was the neurosurgeon that treated the patient in the video, is a leading medical expert in the field, and he's prepared as well to provide oral evidence to the committee if the committee feel that would be helpful to them when looking at how to progress the petition, Mary Ramsey's petition. Mary Ramsey asked me to make a plea, as she always does, to the committee and to keep pushing for the technology to be available here. And she said, just if I would quote her, and she says, "For me and for my part, if focused ultrasound helps anyone avoid what I went through, I will fight to my last breath to get it." And that's kind of a measure of the petitioner, to be honest. This isn't going to benefit her. I think I've said that previously to the committee, but she won't let up. She is making sure, and she is going to try and make sure that nobody has to go through what she went through. And, this treatment could change the lives of many people. So I would urge you to keep it open, urge you to consider looking at the video and getting some evidence from Professor Nandy, and hopefully we can get this treatment available to people in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Rhoda, for that. What I'll do is I'll ask committee members to come in, and then maybe at the end I'll afford you the opportunity to make any final comments. Gail Ross.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, as always, very strong testimony there from Mary Ramsey, and I would like to thank Rhoda Grant for coming along on her behalf. I think that we are duty bound to hear her plea. I certainly wouldn't want to close this petition just now. I do believe that there is a disconnect between what's happening here and how they are pursuing it in England. I also think that the Scottish Government, the action plan on neurological conditions is fantastic. It's, you know, it attends to a lot of different conditions, but there are some that are not specifically mentioned in the plan. And in the vision, it says that everyone with a neurological condition should have access to the care and support they need to live well on their own terms. And certainly that's not what's happening here with Mary Ramsey and others with essential tremor. And I'm really grateful for the offer of Professor Nandy coming in and giving us evidence. I absolutely think that we should accept that offer. I think it's really important that we keep this going, and so I would like to take evidence from Professor Nandy, and if there's anyone else that we see fit to take evidence from. And I would also like to see the video that Rhoda Grant has suggested as well. And I would like to thank her and Mary Ramsey again for some quite emotional dialogue, but very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, convener. First, I have to register an interest in it. I suffer from Parkinson's disease, which is allied to essential tremor. In fact, they thought I had essential tremor first before they decided it was Parkinson's. In the UK, there's something like 1 million sufferers from essential tremor. Not a minority sport in some ways, and it's something that the medical profession should be investigating up to the limits it can. And if there are treatments available, they really need to be included in the medical diaspora to treat the patients where it can be done. People suffer a great deal in science with various neurological diseases, and essential tremor is one of these which the people just get tormented by. And unless we do everything we can to make sure the resources are put in the right direction for this, and where treatment is available should be included in the available range. So I certainly would like to see further evidence if we need it, and keep this open until we get conclusions to some progress in the treatment of essential tremor. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, convener. This petition has been going a long time. I've great sympathy for her, for anybody who suffers in this way. And there's different types of medical services out there across the rest of the UK. I wonder if we could write to NICE to see when the recommendations will come forward, convener. I'd definitely like to keep the petition open like all of our members. And I don't generally think there's anything else I've to add to that.
Okay, thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I think this is a very important issue, and I'm for all the contributions so far, and Tom, particularly Tom Mason's contribution here, and also to Rhoda Grant. And thank you, Rhoda, for that, and obviously the moving petition by Mary Ramsey. I certainly think we should keep this open, most definitely. I don't think we're anywhere long way down the road on this yet at all. Medical breakthroughs are happening all the time, and I agree with David Torrance there about seeing where we are with NICE on that and where they are in England on it. And I also would like to have the opportunity to call Professor Nandy before us with his neurosurgical expertise as to where we are on this whole process, and obviously get the Scottish Government to look at speeding up the purchase of this equipment if this is going to help people with this condition. So anything to do to help and give people a quality of life is extremely important. And the purpose of this committee, obviously, is to hear such moving petitions as we have here today. So I recommend we keep it open, pursue the avenues I've mentioned and what other members of this committee have said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think we do have a consensus that there remains an issue here. I think we have heard powerful testimony from the petitioner, and this whole question about it being, I mean, at a very basic level, it is less intrusive and less expensive process, and it seems to have been something that is regarded as safe elsewhere. I hear what people say around hearing from Professor Nandy and seeing the video. Can we ask the clerks to look at how best that can be done? It may be that we want to bring Professor Nandy in front of us, but I'm very conscious of the very busy timetable we have in the next period, because obviously we're coming towards the closure of the Parliament. So if we're not able to hear that evidence in person, whether we can find some other means by which we can get access to that. But I think the committee would prefer to hear from Professor Nandy personally, but we would maybe look at that. But people are minded to keep it open. I wonder if Rhoda Grant wants to say anything in conclusion.
Just to say that I really appreciate the committee's support and their knowledge about this and the difference it can make to people's lives if we get it. And I appreciate them keeping the petition open, because I think there's a way to go until we can be sure that this treatment's available in Scotland, and that's, I think, what we all want. So thank you.
Okay, in that case, we are agreeing to keep the petition open, to explore ways of hearing that further evidence and raising with Scottish Government and other relevant bodies where we are in relation to this treatment. Is that agreed? Does anybody disagree? No, with that, can I thank Rhoda Grant very much for her attendance? And if we can then move on to the next continued petition for consideration today, which is petition 1762, End the Killing of Wildlife on Grouse Moors and Elsewhere in Scotland, lodged by Libby Anderson and Bob Elliott on behalf of One Kind. The petition calls on the Parliament to conduct a full review of the animal welfare impacts of the use of traps and snares on grouse moors and elsewhere in Scotland. Submissions have now been received from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. The Scottish Government submission notes it is determined to improve standards in the operation of snares and traps, and in particular to improve the welfare of wildlife caught in snares, but does not intend to ban snaring. Following publication of the papers for this week's meeting, the petitioner has been in touch. They have advised they would be pleased if the petition was referred to the ECCLR committee. However, they raised concerns about the petition being considered in the context of the committee's work on wildlife crime. The petitioner notes wildlife crime does not focus on their concerns that the devices notes in the petition are inherently cruel when used in a legal context. I think there are interesting issues here and quite challenging issues, and the issue of animal welfare is obviously a significant part of that. My own feeling is that we should refer it to the committee and flag up that the petitioner, and probably I think we would agree, this is not just an issue about wildlife crime, it is an issue about animal welfare as well. But I certainly think it'd be worthwhile that the work that's been done and the information the petitioner has provided being referred to the committee. And can I ask Tom Mason for his comments?
Thank you, Convener. I agree with what you just said. I think there's a whole load of issues that need to be looked at as a whole. And referring to the EECCL committee would be, I think, the right way to go to make sure that all these issues are kept in one area. Otherwise, it gets all a bit bitty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to refer it to Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee.
Okay, thank you. Maurice Corrie?
Thank you, Convener. I too would support both my colleagues' comments and recommendations to refer it to the Eclair Committee, and I would ask that this is done so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross?
Thanks, convener. Yes, I agree with that. I was quite interested in a couple of points in the Scottish Government's submission about how the welfare of animals in snares and traps can be improved. I'm not sure how that can actually work, and also that they are the least worst solution. I just feel that there are some things, and I come from a rural constituency. I absolutely understand from a rural perspective and a farming perspective that, you know, some animals they need to be controlled for very good reasons. I just feel that what the additional submission from the petitioners are absolutely right. If we put this on to, or refer it on to the Eclair Committee under the wildlife crime kind of scenario, you know, these traps are legal, so it's not really a crime. It is about the animal welfare issue, about, you know, what happens once these animals are caught, and also the animals that end up in these snares and traps that they're not meant for as well. There was a point made about record keeping, monitoring and accountability. I wonder if this is something that the Animal Welfare Commission should be looking at. So I'm happy to refer it on with these particular points being made in the referral. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think we're agreed that we do want to refer this to Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee. We think there are issues here, but we are very alive, as Gail has just said, to the fact that it's not simply about wildlife crime, but about animal welfare and that balance between managing the land and animal cruelty. And we would hope that the committee would take that into account in looking at the issues that have been flagged up here. And if that's agreed with, if we're agreeing to refer it, we would take the opportunity, I think, to thank the petitioners very much for again highlighting these important issues. And they will also be able to follow its consideration within the Eclair Committee as well. Thank them for their engagement with our committee. And we can now move on to the next continued petition for consideration today, which is Petition 1764, Include Evolutionary Studies within the primary school curriculum, lodged by James Robertson on behalf of families in support of evolutionary studies. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to add evolutionary studies to the primary school curriculum. A submission has been received from the Scottish Government. The petitioner was invited to make a written submission, but a submission has not been provided. The Scottish Government is of the view that the current set of experiences and outcomes and benchmarks for both science and religious and moral education provides sufficient scope for primary schools to cover evolution. It goes on to state that it does not consider it necessary for a standalone theme of evolutionary studies to be added to the framework for the curriculum in primary schools. I thought this was a very interesting petition, and this is very often a conversation in Scottish education, the extent to which things are prescribed, and people always want to put things into the curriculum that they have a particular issue in. I personally take confidence in the fact that from our papers there is a clear indication that this work is being done and it has a role inside the primary curriculum. But I'll ask people to come in with their views of what we might do. Starting with David Torrance.
The Scottish Government doesn't agree with what actually is called in the petition, so I'm quite happy to close it under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, with the reassurance that the Scottish Government is writing to Education Scotland senior education officers to advise them of the petition and highlight what's in it.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'm of the mind that this is an ongoing discussion. I know, again, from my council days, is that this is something that's always coming up on our education committees and things, and discussed with the professionals who obviously deliver teaching in schools, so particularly primary schools. So I'm minded to recommend that we close petition, but we do have that opportunity that the Education Scotland Senior Education Authority will advise them of the petition by the Scottish Government. so that it actually addresses the issues that teachers are raising. So there's also a listening mode by the Scottish Government to address this and get the right balance in the teaching in our primary schools on this particular point. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I mean, it is a subject that certainly has come up more than once. Certainly, as the mother of a primary school age child, I know that they do certainly address this in different projects that they do about planets and space and dinosaurs and these different things. And it's, you know, something that should be taught according to your beliefs or non-beliefs in the home as well. I was reassured that the Scottish Government have said that they will contact Education Scotland. I think that under Curriculum for Excellence, it is up to individual teachers what projects they want to put forward in different terms. And it was a shame that we didn't get a response from the petitioner, because I think there were a couple of things in the paper that I certainly picked up. I mean, we're talking about primary age children here, and a lot of the examples that we were given was about, you know, higher biology and advanced hires and things like that, which weren't really relevant. But I do believe that there is a good balance of teaching in schools, and on the basis of the Scottish Government have said that they will talk to Education Scotland. I think we should close the petition. Thank you.
Tom Mason.
Thank you, convener. The inclusion of various subjects in curriculum is always complex. I mean, there's a continual balance between the what is required by the central education authorities, what's required by the parents, and what is required by the surrounding area, and so on. And getting that balance right really has to be left to the individual schools at the end of the day. But I think we continue to make sure people are to take evolution and other subjects into consideration on a continuous basis. Then that's all we can achieve. But I don't think anything more can be done by us at this point. So closing it under 15.7 is appropriate here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm reflecting on Gail's comments about primary school education. It seems a very long time ago since my own kids were through that process, but I do reflect that I think the primary curriculum does have a huge flexibility that allows for all sorts of interesting, exciting things to be done, and that, you know, many of them are done, and I am reassured in the information that we've given. I'm also reassured by the fact the Scottish Government has indicated they're willing to contact the Education Scotland senior education officers about the petition, and that allows that to go into the system. But I think as a committee we're agreeing, they would recognise important issues that are flagged up here, but we're agreeing to close the petition on the basis of the discussion that we've had, that these are issues that are dealt with in primary school, and that the Education Scotland has been flagged up about the importance of what we think is reflected in the petition itself. I think we're agreeing to close the petition. I don't see any disagreement, and we would of course want to thank the petitioner very much for their engagement with the Public Petitions Committee, and thank them for their interest. The next continued petition for consideration today is petition 1765 on Make Those in Scottish Public Office Accountable by Fiona McBride. The petition is calling on the Scottish Government to ensure that effective measures are introduced which secure accountability of all members of the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government agencies for misuse and abuse of both parliamentary privilege and conferred authority assigned to individuals in positions of trust. Submissions have now been received from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. At our previous consideration, the committee noted that politicians and public servants are subject to law, and additionally MSPs and those in public life are bound by specific codes of conduct. The Scottish Government's response of 17th January 2020 acknowledges this, highlighting its accountability to the Parliament in respect of all ministerial functions and activities, as well as the Scottish Ministerial Code. The Scottish Government does not agree with the petitioner that the Lord Advocate's ministerial role conflicts with or interferes with his prosecutorial role, as the Scotland Act 1998 provides that any decision is taken by him independently of any other person. The petitioner has provided more information for the basis of her petition, which highlights alleged misconduct by the Lord Advocate. As the committee will be aware, any investigation into misconduct by the Lord Advocate in his ministerial role will be made via the Ministerial Code. It is therefore not appropriate for the committee to consider specific cases or for the committee to investigate alleged misconduct by individuals. We're all very aware that we wish to address in this Public Petitions Committee not specific incidences, but general policy, and that has been the role of the committee in this regard. I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action, and can I ask Maurice Corey first?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm of the mind to close this petition under Rule 15.7 Standing Orders on the basis that there are actually effective measures in place to ensure the appropriate conduct of individuals in public office. There are checks and balances and effective measures, and I see no purpose in continuing this petition at all, and therefore I would agree to close it.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I completely echo your sentiments in your opening remarks to say that it's not for this committee to consider specific cases, and I agree with Maurice Corey that we had said previously, and it's been backed up by the Scottish Government's response, that there are effective rules already in place, the Code of Conduct, the Ministerial Code. So I would agree to close under 15.2 of standing order, 15.7, sorry, of standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason?
Thank you, Convener. I agree with what's been said, and I think we should close on 15.7.
Okay, David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. Like Tom and the rest, I agree with what's been said. Just to close the petition under 15.7 of standing orders.
Okay, thank you. I should flag up that the petitioner did raise concerns that the Ethical Standards Commissioner had not responded. I think that the question is one of confidence in the processing system, and that while the petitioner or others may have individual direct experience of concerns, I think we need to look at whether there are effective measures to address the whole question of how people conduct themselves, and this has been flagged up already in committee. And I think it would be fair to say there's consensus in the committee that we take the view that effective measures are in place to ensure appropriate conduct of individuals in public office and to deal with those who behave inappropriately, and we're agreeing therefore to close this petition, and I don't see any disagreement to that. So with that, can I again thank the petitioner for engaging with the Public Petitions Committee, and of course the petitioner should note that they are able to return with a petition after a year if they felt these issues that they've raised still merit further consideration by the Public Petitions Committee. If we can now move on to the next continued petition for consideration today, which is Petition 1767 on Scottish Fire and Rescue legislation and human rights by Stewart Monroe, calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to conduct a review of the Fire Scotland Act 2005 and the Fire Additional Function Scotland Order 2005 to ensure full compliance with Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the Human Rights Act 1998 and the Scotland Act 1998. Submissions have been received from the Scottish Government, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the petitioner. The committee had asked for views on whether any variance in the wording of current legislation governing the SFRS contravenes the European Convention on Human Rights, specifically in relation to Article 2, the right to life, whether there are any plans to review the Fire Scotland Act 2005 in light of the concerns raised by the petitioner. Neither the Scottish Government nor the SFRS agree that the current legislation is breach of Article 2 of the ECHR. The Scottish Government does not intend to review the 2005 Act in light of the concerns raised by the petitioner, as the legislation has been reviewed extensively via the Police and Reform Scotland Act 2012 and the subsequent Justice Committee's substantive post-legislative review of the 2012 Act in 2018-19. Both responses are summarised in the clerk's note, and both consider the petition points in detail but do not agree with the petitioner. Petitioners of the view that, to make the 2005 legislation fully compliant with the ECHR, all that is required is for the SFRS to be given an explicit statutory duty to rescue at every category of life-threatening emergency which they attend. Again, I think this is an interesting petition, and I just for the record wanted to thank in particular the SFRS for their submission. I thought it was very detailed, took our questions very seriously and gave us a very full picture of their views. I certainly personally am not, do not find myself in agreement with the petitioner in this. I feel confident in the responses that have been had in this regard, that the approach in the legislation is fully compliant. But I'll ask members for their comments, starting with Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I was also thinking of the SFRS response went into, and I think it explained it extremely well. I think that we have no choice but to close this petition because there have been substantive reviews of the legislation, as it says in our notes. The Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act 2012 and also the Justice Committee have also done post-legislative scrutiny of that. I also think that given the remit that the Scottish courts have to challenge any legislation that is not in compliance with human rights, that hasn't been done in relation to the Fire Scotland Act. And therefore I don't believe that there is any contravention of human rights. It says so in both our submissions. A very interesting point, though, brought forward by the petitioner, so I'd like to thank them for that. But I'm doing so close under Rule 15.7. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. The explanation and submissions were very comprehensive. It is a very intricate issue, and in the end of the day, I think we couldn't take it any further. The next stage, I guess, if the petitioner thinks so, is to actually have a case actually taken to court. Because whatever opinions are taken now will simply be subject to as an opinion and not necessarily a fact in the end. So at this stage, the only thing we can do is close the petition and thank the petitioner for doing it. Raises some interesting points, which will keep lawyers happy for some time, I think.
Thank you very much. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Like you, have confidence in the very detailed responses that we received from the SFRS and the Scottish Government, so I'm happy to close the petition.
Okay, thank you. And Maurice Corey.
I think I recall this relates also a bit to an incident way back when the FRS, or maybe in another, when it was in the previous organisation, referred to in an incident in Lanarkshire to do, if I may right, a manshaft. But I felt that since then there have been a lot of examinations of the functionality of this Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and it's been brought in line, and I'm content that it has reviewed itself absolutely well, and I would be most advised that we're most likely to close this petition under 15.7 of the standing orders, and agree with my colleagues that there is sufficient coverage by SFRS to actually deal with these situations in the future. So I have no problem in commending that recommendation.
In that case, I think we are agreed that we will close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. We are satisfied that the relevant legislation is compliant. We want again to thank the petitioner and for all those who responded, and of course the petitioner would have the right to return in a year with this petition if they felt that was worthwhile, but we would thank them very much for engaging. Can I, just in conclusion, thank Broadcasting and the clerks for getting us through yet another, or our second virtual meeting, and any mistakes were certainly not to do with Broadcasting or the clerks, but I think we've had an interesting and useful committee meeting this morning, and we very much appreciate the support we've been given, and with that, can we close the meeting? Thank you.